So welcome to the very last lecture for the Veterinary Technician Online Review course for Anatomy and Physiology, and this lecture will cover the senses. So there are traditional senses, like we know that there's 5 typical senses that we always hear about and talk about: the hearing, seeing, feeling, smelling, and tasting, but are there more? So what are sense organs? These are extensions of the central nervous system that allow it to monitor what's going on inside and outside the body. That's what sense organs do. In these sense organs, there are sensory receptors, okay? So these are basically modified nerve endings, which are actually dendrites, because in our neurology, we talked about those neurons, and how at the end there's dendrites that collect that information. So when they're triggered by a stimulus, they generate a nerve impulse that travels up to our central nervous system and is interpreted as a particular sensation, whether it be touch, taste, smell, whatever. So the general types of stimulation: the following stimuli will create a nerve impulse in a neuronal dendrite that will travel up to our central nervous system, and the central nervous system will interpret that sensation. So it can be a mechanical stimulation, which could be touch, hearing, or even our balance; thermal stimulation, hot and cold; electromagnetic stimulation, which is actually our vision; and chemical stimulation, for example, taste and smell. So all different types of stimulation. How many senses are there? We know about hearing, smelling, feeling, seeing, and tasting, but what else is there? There's actually 10 senses, and they're actually separated into 2 categories. So there's general senses, and then there's special senses, and we're going to talk about both categories. So general senses, we have visceral sensation. So what visceral sensation helps us feel is hunger, thirst, and hollow organ fullness, for example, full bladder, okay? And this is a chemical and a mechanical type of stimulation. So then the second type of sense is touch. So it's what's sensed is touch or pressure, and this is a mechanical stimulation. And then there's temperature, which is hot or cold, which is a thermal stimulation, obviously. And then there's pain, which is an intense stimulation of any type, and this can be mechanical, chemical, or thermal. And then there's proprioception, which is the body position and movement. That's what's sensed, and that's a mechanical stimulus. So visceral sensation. Most are vague and poorly localized. It includes sensations such as hunger, thirst, but also includes visceral stretch receptors in the GI tract and the urinary system. So these organs will stretch to a certain point, then they will reach their maximum stretch and will cause pain or discomfort, and that is visceral sensation. Touch and pressure is a tactile sense, a sensation of something being in contact with the surface of your body. For example, this cat in this very cute picture. Pressure is a sensation of something pressing on the body surface. And the different touch and pressure receptors produce sensation of light contact, deep pressure, vibrations, or even hair movement. Temperature. Superficial temperature receptors in the skin can detect upward and downward changes in the skin temperature, and that'll send signals up to your CNS. Central temperature receptors are actually in the hypothalamus. We've talked about this before. I don't remember in what lecture, but we did talk about receptors in the hypothalamus that will monitor temperature in the blood specifically. Central nervous system can activate mechanisms, for example, sweating if we're too hot, or piloerection, which is the hair standing up on end when we're really cold, to correct hypothermia or hyperthermia. So assumingly this cat in this picture would have piloerection, thanks to her central nervous system recognizing that he is trying to fight off hypothermia. Now, pain. Nociceptors are those specific receptors that are responsible in feeling pain. Pain receptors are widely distributed inside and on the surface of the body, but it's not present in the brain. How cool is that? So nociceptors are completely absent from the brain, hence why surgeons can do brain surgery with the patient completely awake. There is no nociceptors in the brain. The process of experiencing pain is called nociception. The pain response consists of 4 steps. There's transduction, transmission, modulation, and perception of pain. So transduction is the conversion of a painful stimulus into a nerve impulse. Okay, so I put my hand on a hot stove. Transduction is the conversion of the stimulus into the nerve impulse. After that, transmission, which is the conduction of that nerve impulse to the spinal cord. So from neuron to neuron to neuron to neuron, it'll make its way all the way up to my spinal cord, and that's called transmission. Then there's modulation. So this changes the sensory nerve impulse, can amplify or suppress the impulse. And then the perception is the conscious awareness of the painful stimulation. Now, proprioception. It's the sense of the body position and movement. Stretch receptors in the skeletal muscle, tendons, ligaments, and joint capsules sense movement of limbs, position of joints, and the state of contraction of muscles, and also the amount of tension being exerted on tendons and ligaments. So all of this together is going to help our bodies with proprioception, which is the sense of our body's position and movement. So now on to special senses: taste, smell, hearing, equilibrium, and vision. Okay, all of these are pretty common senses that we already know about. So taste, also known as gustatory sense, is a chemical sense. The chemical receptors are located on the tongue, and those are your taste buds. And so you can see on this cat, they have those papillae on the tongue, those spiny protrusions, and those taste buds are located there. They're also found in the lining of the mouth and as well in the pharynx. So substances that are eaten dissolve in the saliva and reach taste receptors. So they reach those taste buds, and then they generate a nerve impulse that travels to the central nervous system. So this here is the surface of the tongue. So I'm going to eat my pizza, and it's going to come right here to the taste receptor here, my taste bud, and then it's going to generate a nerve impulse. See all this? This is the nerve that's attaching itself to the taste bud, and it's going to generate a nerve impulse and travel up this way, up to my central nervous system, where it's going to be interpreted as a taste or a flavor. Smell, also called olfactory sense. It's a chemical sense, just like taste. It's very important in most non-human animals. So a lot of wildlife will rely on their smell for a lot of things, whether it be predators, mates, whatever. Olfactory cells and supporting cells are located in the epithelial patches in the nasal passage, actually. So there's hair-like processes, which are actually modified dendrites from a neuron, and they project up from the olfactory cell into the mucous membrane of our nasal passage. So when we smell something in, that mucus layer is going to have those little projections in the mucus layer that's going to help with the scent. These sensory processes will come in contact with odor molecules and then generate an impulse that will travel to the brain, where it's interpreted as a smell. Now, hearing, also called auditory sense, which is a mechanical sense. It converts vibrations of air molecules into a nerve impulse. Most structures of the ear are located in the temporal bone of the skull. So the ear is separated into 3 physical and functional areas. So you have to understand the anatomy of the ear to be able to comprehend the mechanical action of the auditory sense. So there's an external ear, which acts as a funnel to collect the sound wave vibrations and direct them to the eardrum. So the external ear is the pinna, the external canal leading all the way up to the eardrum, and the eardrum itself is a part of the external ear. Then after that, we have our middle ear, which amplifies and transmits the vibrations of the eardrum to the inner ear. And the middle ear is actually made up of 3 little tiny bones, auditory ossicles. Those are located in the middle ear, and that's what that's composed of. And then finally, the inner ear, which contains the sensory receptors that are going to convert that vibration into a nerve impulse, which is then going to go to our brain to be interpreted as a sound. Also, there's equilibrium sense within the inner ear. The external ear, again, like we said, it is made up of the pinna, the auditory canal, and also the tympanic membrane. This is the tympanic membrane here. So using an otoscope, we can take a look inside of that tympanic membrane, which is the eardrum. It's just a thin piece of connective tissue. It's tightly stretched across the opening of the external auditory canal, and sound waves will vibrate the tympanic membrane. Now, moving on to the middle ear. So there's 3 ossicles, which are small bones, and they're linked to the tympanic membrane, and they're also on one side. Okay, so this is the middle ear. It's attached to the eardrum here, and on the other side, it's attached to the cochlea, and the cochlea is a part of the inner ear. So this is the middle ear here, and it's made up of 3 bones. Acts as a system of levers that transmit sound wave vibrations from the eardrum to the cochlea. And there's also a eustachian tube, or an auditory tube, that connects the middle ear cavity with the pharynx, equalizes air pressure on the 2 sides of the tympanic membrane. So when you're going over that steep hill and you get dizzy, it's because of the air pressure equalizing in the middle ear. So the 3 ossicles, auditory ossicles, are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And the stapes is what connects to what's called the oval window, which is a part of the cochlea, and the malleus is what's connected to the eardrum. Now, moving on to the inner ear, this is the area that's involved with hearing and equilibrium. The cochlea is a shell-shaped spiral cavity in the temporal bone, and this is where hearing happens, okay? So within it, you're going to find the organ of cont'd, which is a fluid-filled portion that makes up the receptor organ of the hearing. So within this fluid-filled portion, that's where the nerve impulse is going to be generated. So sound wave vibrations cause the tympanic membrane and the ossicles to vibrate. This causes sensory hair-like structures to vibrate within the cochlea. So remember that cochlea, there's fluid in there, and it's going to vibrate that fluid. And these hair-like protrusions, like you see here, are going to bend back and forth, and that is going to generate the nerve impulse that travels to the brain to be interpreted as sound. Now, equilibrium is a mechanical sense. It helps maintain balance by keeping track of the position and movements of the head. Equilibrium involves 3 different things. So equilibrium receptors, which are located in the vestibule, which is in the cochlea, and of the inner ear. And then also information from the eye, and also proprioceptors. So when these 3 do not agree with each other, the result is motion sickness. That's why when you're on a boat and you get motion sickness, you can just look at the horizon and your eyes are going to stabilize on that horizon, which is going to help with seasickness because you're going to fix one of these 3 equilibrium factors. Now, vision. The most components of the eye function to help form an accurate vision image, not to detect it. Photoreceptors that detect the image and generate visual nerve impulses are a singular layer of cells in the retina, actually. So the retina is what does that job. So, layers of the globe. There's 3 different layers. There's the outer fibrous layer, middle vascular layer, and the innermost nervous layer. The outer fibrous layer brings light in and gives the eye strength and its shape. There's 2 components to the outer layer of the eye. There's the cornea and the sclera. So the cornea is a transparent piece over top of your eye, and it emits light into the interior of the eye. So you can see this is the cornea here. It's kind of protrudes out from the eye there. You can touch it. Like if you take your finger and touch your eye right now, you're going to be touching your cornea. And there is no blood vessels in there. And then there's the sclera, which is the other part of the outer layer of the eye. And the sclera is actually what makes up the white of your eyeball. There's a middle vascular layer, so it's also called the uvea. It has several parts, of course, subcategories to every subcategory. The first one that we're going to talk about is the choroid. So between the sclera and the retina is where the choroid is located, as you can see in this picture here. Pigment and blood vessels. In most animals, the choroid forms the tapetum a highly reflective area in the rear of the eye. So remember, the tapetum lucidum is what makes those animals' eyes glow in the dark, and it helps them see at nighttime. And thanks to the choroid, that's what forms the tapetum. Then there is the iris. It's the pigmented muscular diaphragm. So that's what makes your eye color, controls the amount of light that enters the posterior part of the eyeball. And then also your pupil is the opening at the center of the iris that dilates and constricts depending on however much light is let into the eye. And then the last part of the middle layer is the ciliary body. This is a ring-shaped structure behind the iris, and its muscle adjusts the shape of the lens to allow both near and far visions. And then there's the inner nervous layer of the eye. So this lines the back of the eye. So it's the retina. It contains the sensory receptors necessary for vision, and within that layer, there's rods and cones, and those are the sensory receptors that are going to take what you're seeing and emit it as a nerve impulse to be interpreted by the brain. So there are compartments to the eyeball. And they're both fluid filled. One is the aqueous compartment, which is more towards the front of the eyeball, and it contains clear watery fluid called aqueous humor. And then there's vitreous compartment, which is the back of the eyeball, and it contains clear gelatinous fluid called vitreous humor, and it fills the whole back of the eyeball behind the lens. So what is the lens? It's a transparent piece of the eye, and it's made up of layers of fiber. The front surface is in contact with the aqueous humor, and the back surface is actually in contact with the vitreous humor, so it separates both compartments. The role of the lens is to help focus a clear image on the retina on the back. So the retina is located on the back of the eyeball. It's where the visual image is formed and converted into a nerve impulse that can be interpreted by the brain. It's very complex and multi-layered. There is an optic disc in the retina, and this is the site where the nerve fibers on the inside surface of the retina converge and leave the eye to form the optic nerve. So that's where the information is going to be sent to the nerve. Now, that's the eyeball. There are extraocular structures that are going to be involved in vision. There is the conjunctiva, which is a thin membrane, transparent membrane, so it covers the front portion of the globe and lines the interior surface of the eyelid. So as you can see here, they're stretching back that eyelid, and that's the conjunctiva. So there is eyelids, no surprise there, upper and lower folds of skin. And then there's the lateral medial canthus. So these are just the corners of the eye. That's all it is. The lateral is the lateral corner, and the medial is the medial corner. And then there's also a nictitating membrane, which is the third eyelid of domestic animals. It's located medially between the eyelid and the globe, and you can see by applying pressure above this cat's eye, we're able to move that nictitating membrane, or the third eyelid, up. Then there's lacrimal apparatuses, okay? So this is basically your tear glands and tear ducts that are going to help lubricate the eye, and they secrete and produce tears and drain away from the surface of the eye. There's the lacrimal puncta, which is the tear drainage system. There's the lacrimal sac, which brings draining tears down into the lacrimal duct, which will drain directly into the nasal cavity, as you can see in this picture up here. Obviously, there's muscles involved with our eye, and they attach to the sclera of the eye, so the white of the eye, and they're capable of a wide range of movement.